3 hot tips for tendering. There are lots and lots of tips, but I suppose 3 really important tips which I think of and which has come to me over time and the experience that I've had are the following. Firstly, a client often will give me a request for tender document when it's about to go to market and say, Scott, can you have a quick review of that? Don't take too long. Just go through that quickly and tell us that it's okay or not. And the very first thing that I do is to make sure that the evaluation criteria, so those are the criteria that we're saying we're going to assess the tenders against, are actually matched some way in the schedules, so the returnable information that the tenderers are going to put in. Because obviously you can't evaluate somebody or if you haven't got the information against which to evaluate them. That's one side of it. And the other side is if there is more information being asked for than criteria, then you're wasting people's time because you're asking for information that you're not going to evaluate. So you either need to put it in as a criteria or remove the schedule. And without exaggerating, 9 out of 10 times there is a problem in that simple matching process. It probably takes about 20 or 30 minutes, and it's something that any client could do for themselves. So I think that's really important, and obviously you can end up in real hot water with that, particularly when you've got evaluation criteria which don't have a schedule. As I mentioned before, one of the largest areas for litigation over the last few years has been where agencies don't use the stated criteria to evaluate the tenders. Now, you can't use those criteria if you haven't got the information. So what happens usually in this situation, unless the lawyers are called in to sort of correct the problem, is the agency says, oh, we better evaluate on these criteria then, because that's the information that we've got. So obviously that is a clear breach of the process contract and presents large exposure. So that's why it's so important to go through that matching process. So that's the first one. The second one I think people are getting better at, but I have been involved in tenders, and I've seen tenders and observed tenders where the wrong people are sitting around the evaluation table. It's important to have a number, not just 1 or 2, but preferably 3 or 5, an odd number just in the instances of disagreement. Then the majority can prevail, although it's always best to have unanimity if you can, but at least then you can have a majority, as I say, if it's an odd number. So you need to have 3 or 5. I mean, you don't want to overdo these processes and have them take too long and have too many people involved, so you need to be cognizant of the value. But for high-value tenders, you should have a well-represented tender evaluation committee which has people experienced in what it is that you're looking for and what it is that you're procuring, and has people who are capable technically and intellectually of assessing the information that's in front of them. Because if somebody doesn't fit that criteria, then they shouldn't be there, and somebody else should. Sometimes it's sort of a case of who's available Friday afternoon because we've got to get this thing out and awarded, and that really isn't good enough. You need to put people's diaries away and project manage it such that people are doing better than that. So I think that's really important. And on that as well, I think it's important to remember that you can always look outside. So, for example, borrow expertise from other councils or borrow expertise from other government organisations who would freely perhaps give a person for a day or two on the understanding that the favour might be returned at some later date. So that happens a lot in New South Wales in the tenders that I work on. It brings a different perspective. It means also that the people on the Tender Evaluation Committee aren't part of the organisation. Therefore, they are totally objective, so they're not pushing any particular barrier. They're not tainted with any internal politics. They don't have to worry about what their reporting lines are. They can assess the tenders completely clearly, which is, I think, really important. So that's 2. The third really important piece of advice or tip would be to make sure that you do not give information to a tenderer that other tenderers don't have. So maintaining the level playing field at all times, very important. And if you do give information to a tender in an appropriate question and answer situation, and they're fine, try and have those questions written and asked in writing. Try and respond to those questions in writing, but not just to that tenderer, to all tenderers. If a tenderer wants to engage with you about some innovation, for example, we talked about innovation before, if they want to engage with you about some innovative ideas they don't want shared with other tenderers, that's fine too. They can say, this is a commercial in confidence question, and if you can't answer it to me and me alone, then I'll withdraw it, but hopefully you can answer it. And I've had some examples where that has really brought about some enormous value for money savings. There was a contract that I worked on in New South Wales where every other tenderer, for example, was $40 million for this particular service that was going on over 5 years. And the tenderer that won was $10 million because they asked a very clever question about refueling, the ability of refueling over water surfaces, and still complying with the environmental management system and so on. And there was a real problem. Whilst other tenderers were going to and from shore all the time to refuel for what it was that they were doing, this organisation was able to have air-driven machinery, so unfueled, but fueled with airlines going across the watercourse. So it was an innovation. They asked the question through the tender period. They were given the answer, and because of that, the government saved $30 million on that one contract. So it can be a wonderful thing. So as I say, there is room for commercial in confidence questions, but as an absolute starting point, it's essential that all answers are given to all tenderers at or as close to the same time as possible. So no party is favoured, no party is in a better position than the other one inappropriately. It sounds like such a simple thing, but a recent case involving Telstra, obviously a very large company, were tendering to the Department of Communications, Technology and Information and the Arts, DICTA, and it was the tender for the broadband services actually. But to cut a long story short, that process was audited, and the Auditor General found that DICTA had given an answer or dealt with the tenderer directly and answered only to that tenderer when in fact the question and answer should have gone to all. And you'd think an organisation like DICTA would know better, but it just goes to show that these mistakes are still being made and made at high levels in large organisations.